All right, so welcome everyone. So today we're going to do part two, which is on centering prayer. And centering prayer of the practices that we'll be talking about is probably one of the most maybe foreign, or I would say, for in my own personal experience, it's one of the most difficult to practice, but at the same time is one of the richest ones to get into. The basic, concept of it is that it is a way of integrating prayer and meditation. But before we get into it, I wanted to do just review a few highlights from last week's session because they will apply to the session today, and they'll apply to every session after today. So the first one is just a reminder of our goals, the goals of this series, and they're from Psalm 46, 1 to 10, when it talks about be still and know that I am God. And so we're looking for learning new ways to be able to exactly do that, to be still before the Lord, to listen to his voice, and also to meditate on his word. Another thing that we talked about last week was the idea of being open to embrace all kinds of prayers in the spirit of Ephesians 6:18, which says, pray in the spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. And so that's the other thing that we're trying to do here. And so last week we talked about a few disclaimers that I had for you. We call them things to remember throughout the series. And so the first one was that these practices are supplemental. They are not replacements of your current practice. We also talked about this series being just a sampler. Remember that beautiful platter that we're going to take what suits us and what doesn't suit us, we're just going to leave it. And so considering that it's just a sampler, even today, we're just getting to like the little tip of the iceberg of the practice. And in every single one of them, we'll just barely touch on them. These are practices that normally, you can take an entire course on them, and we're just introducing you to them. And again, you take what you want and leave what doesn't help you. The next thing would be that these tools are guidelines, really, and they're not rules. So let's not get stuck on them. There even some of them, for example, what we're doing today, we have several steps, like step 1, do this, step 2, to this, and they're just to help you, guide you, so that you can get the most out of your practice. They're not rules. Don't judge yourself hardly on them. And it's not, something that you have to perform. It's just there to help you. Then just another reminder is that when you're triggered, dig deep. As you read over things, or as we talk about certain things, even in the materials that, I give, supplemental materials, if any of you go into them, remember that you'll be triggered. Don't worry about it. Just don't throw out the baby with the bathwater if something triggers you, right? Just attend to the trigger. And the last one is that Barish and I were just presenters here. We're no experts. So we come to you with humility, knowing that, well, there are people who have been doing this for 10 years, 20 years. In our tradition, in our Christian tradition, and in our family of churches, these are not things that we normally do. And so we are just beginning, and we're all learning together. We will give you some tips on what we have found helpful. And of course, you are free to dig more, into it, if there's any practice that particularly speaks to you. Last week we also talked about how often our prayer life, will consist of our requests to God, our intercession, confession of sin, and we ask God for forgiveness, and all of this beautifully sandwiched up between praises and thanksgiving. And these are great ways to pray to God and to communicate with God. And as disciples, this is what this is how we communicate with God. At the same time, it's good to understand that these are monologues. They can easily become monologues that we have with God, and that we must acknowledge that we need to set aside also some time in our hearts and our minds to dialogue with God, more than just us talking to him. Times to listening, even if it is just when we open our Bibles, God speaking to us, but also when we sit down in prayer, times to quiet ourselves down, to be able to hear God and to listen to what he may have to say. And when it comes to this, again, we are barely scratching the surface of what this is like, because it's not something that we are familiar with doing. It feels uncomfortable, especially center in prayer for many people just as they start. I know that it was the case for me. It's foreign, it's odd, it's I don't know what I'm doing. Am I doing it right? I'll say, just relax and experience these things, and learn, a bit from them is my recommendation. And for many of us, after 20 or 30 years, and as we mature in Christ, we want to seek those deeper experiences that challenge us, and that invariably will require us exploring practices outside of what we conventionally do, and what we're taught within our churches. It does call for going outside, because the way that we traditionally pray is quite postmodern. I mean, it's a way of praying that engages the mind a lot, where we're constantly thinking as opposed to resting. And so we're barely scratching the surface of it, and we will see. I believe that we will see the benefits of it. I know that I've seen them in my own life, and that's the reason why I'm happy to share these things with you. So last week I had left you with a few sources to go and explore. I encourage you, if you haven't yet, especially the one on your right there, David Pokta, just because he's one of our own, and he speaks to our need for contemplative prayer in a way that we all relate to, right? From his own experience as well. In that video, I mean, his wife also shares a bit. I found it really helpful. And then there's I had given you this this book, and I realized Sarah, thank you, Sarah Felushko, she texted me and she was like, oh, there's also the audiobook, which is what I'm most familiar with. At the end of this, I will also put the audiobook there, because the audiobook is slightly different and very helpful as well. Barish, I was hoping if we can do, if we can take a pulse, yeah, for the next part.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm about to send you a link in the chat. So if you have time, you can do it later or after. But we have a little quick survey for you just to collect your thoughts on these resources. And also, if you wanted to receive an email, I know it's tough after a Zoom call, you sort of lose all those links in the chat. So if you want to receive an email of the resources that we've talked about, the slides, like a copy of the slides and the some links to these resources, please fill out that form, the Google form. You don't have to sign up or anything, but you can you can fill that out if you want to receive more information, and maybe just you can use your reactions if you have a thumbs up. What did any of you find these resources or the Dave Pokta video useful? Was it helpful for you? You can also enter that in chat. And if you would like if you have some thoughts about additional resources, please fill out that form.
Okay. So
Dave Pokta was great. Okay, yeah, Mark checked out the Dave Pokta thing. Okay. Thanks, guys.
all right, so we have got, here we go, week 2, centering prayer, Christ-centered meditation, an active practice of sitting still before the Lord. If you're anything like me, sometimes the thought of sitting still is the last thing that I want to think about. because I want to do things. I want to move. I have plans. I have goals. I have deadlines. I have, a schedule to keep. It can be, quite challenging. And yet here we are. This is what we're talking about today: is the art of sitting still before the Lord. So one of the key passages in understanding the heart of centering prayer is this verse from Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. And we've mentioned it before as part of the goal of the series, but it is worth unpacking a little bit the beautiful imagery that's within that verse. And so even when we think about the idea of being still, and when God asks us to be still, he's looking for an attitude of surrender and inactivity before him, if you can imagine. And, it's, it's just right here, just with those two words, that in itself is a challenge. Um, Not only because we're so active, both physically, but also, mentally, even if, never mind, all the things that we're constantly doing, we're always thinking and planning and plotting and correcting and analyzing and, you know, making plans, etc. So centering prayer allows us the opportunity to actually sit before God for a period of time. Usually people, the recommended time is 20 minutes. For a period of time, we're not doing 20 minutes today, but that's the recommended time. And so during that time that we sit before God, we are not asking, we are not plotting, we're just sitting there, enjoying, trusting. And that is a big one. Just trusting that He is God, knowing that He is God, and that He can work in our hearts without us having to move a finger, without us having to engage. That He can sort of move, in our hearts from, like in the background. We're in a way during centering prayer and His mercy totally dependent on Him. And here's where our image of God is very important. What we think about God and how we perceive God, it's very important. And so I have a reflection for you. I want you to take a moment and turn off your video and mute yourselves if you haven't. And during this portion, just really take the time to picture God in your minds and think for a moment about who He is to you. Is He a kingly figure? Is He a judge? Is He a father? Is He a friend? How do you see God? And how does that image influence your prayer? And once you've thought about that for, a minute or so, spend some time writing it right now in your journal. So this is something that we will do today. We'll do 2 reflections that require journaling, and one at the very end that where we will be sharing with one another. But for this portion, just write down in your journal, and we'll give you a few minutes to do that. I myself, I'm going to turn off my camera too, just so that, we're all focused in this exercise, and something that I myself am doing too. And I'll leave the question on the screen so you can still see it. So spend a few minutes answering that. Okay, so I hope that you had some time to write down your thoughts. Um, this is a very important thing um, for us to think about who God is and who God is to us. Because sometimes when our image of God, when we pray, does not match what we know of God from Scripture, it can be quite difficult. It becomes very difficult to connect with God. And it is important that we start, our prayers, and especially a period of centering prayer when we're, meant to be, quiet, um, and to surrender our thoughts to God. That our image of God you know, is appropriate, and that we connect with who God really is for us. That we take the time to reflect on who it is that we're going to be spending this time being still with, whether it is for 5 minutes, for 20 minutes, or for how long it is. And so now that we're going to, meditate, about it, meditate, on who God is, then, we can be ready right, to do our centering praying practice. Um, One word here is that during the actual centering prayer, it's not that we're actively thinking about it. It's not that we're actively thinking about who God is. We're actually trying to not think much. But what happens is that our view of who God is, and having taken the time to remember who God is for us, will in a way inform our prayer time. And so this act of reflecting about God and reminding ourselves of who he is will prepare our hearts to be open for him to work in our hearts during our time of prayer. So let's see. So there we go. Be still and know that I am God. Um, Another scripture that is often associated with centering prayer, and as you read, if this is something that interests you, and it's the next scripture is a scripture that you'll come across quite a bit within this context, and it's Matthew 6:6, where it says, "But when you pray, go into your room and close the door and pray to your Father who is unseen, and then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." And here the idea is, yes, closing the door when you go to your room, definitely. I mean, having your prayer time to be something, private, although obviously centering prayer can be done in a group like this, like we're about to do, in a few minutes. But think of it more as closing the door in your mind, like in your mind, shutting the door to all the outside stuff that is happening, so that God, who sees your mind and who sees your heart, can reward you. And also, another idea behind this is the rewards that we get from just spending that time in silence with God. Something that Teresa of Avila said, this is a very interesting quote, is that all the difficulties in prayer can be attributed to one cause: praying as if God were absent. And I think of how many times, sometimes when for me, this happens to me sometimes when I'm, in, whether it because I'm in a rush or depending on how I'm feeling, how I'm doing emotionally or what's happening for me, I might just jump into prayer without preparing myself right before I pray. Um, and and then we have a hard time when it comes to centering prayer, even more so. So at that time, when you're, whether now, when we do it now together, when you turn off your camera and you're in your own time, or at home, when you're on your own practice, whenever you're praying, if if you think that God is absent, and it's not even that you consciously will think that God is absent, but if you're not, um, if you're not aware in tune of God's presence, yes, prayer becomes very difficult. So again, it's the reason why it's so important. So I'm going to walk you through very briefly through the various steps of centering prayer. There are 4 steps, and I will have them on the screen all the time for you to be able to refer to. The first one is the sacred word. The idea here is that you will choose a sacred word as the symbol of your intention to consent to God's presence and action within you. And I have there for you a couple of examples of what the sacred word may be. It may be, Jesus or Lord or peace or grace. It can even be a phrase, as long as it's a short phrase, like be still, or just even simply be. Um, And the idea of having that small word is something that will help you through the practice to redirect your thoughts back to stillness whenever you notice yourself thinking. And we'll talk about this in the next part. And so something here is that once you choose your sacred word at the beginning of your centering prayer period, like, don't change it. Just pick a word. It doesn't have to be something really big, just something small that connects with your heart. Once you pick it, don't change it in the middle of the prayer. Like, stick to that word until the end of your prayer time. And if you felt like, okay, that word wasn't useful, you can change it for the next time. So your second step will be your preparation, kind of like what we just talked about. So yes, you want to sit comfortably with your eyes closed. I personally don't close my eyes because I'm weird that way. I'm one of those people. I don't know. If I close my eyes, then actually I think more. So for myself, what I do is that I try to find one point, one focus, something that I can look at, or that I can stare at. But that's just me. For most people, actually keeping their eyes open is a problem. So recommended to close your eyes and settle briefly and check in with your body, how you're doing. You want to be comfortable, but not too comfortable that you fall asleep, right? You want to have your keep a straight back, have your legs, positioned comfortably. Um, if you fall asleep, parenthesis here, because I've done it. If you fall asleep, I mean, imagine in a 20-minute, centering prayer time, for some of us, it can be very easy. No biggie. Don't worry about it. Remember that God grants sleep to those he loves. So it's okay. Just be graceful, have grace on yourself. God is having grace on you. But here in your preparation time, you want to sit comfortably, close your eyes, settle yourself, and offer your sacred word to God. And this can be just a simple statement, even a simple prayer of, God, my intention here is to spend this time still before you and to use my sacred word, peace, to remind myself to be here with you. And that's enough. Just a simple statement to God of your intention and your consent that this is what I want to do. That is very important because what happens during that time of prayer may not be entirely up to you. There's sometimes when thoughts come into our minds, and how can we possibly control your thoughts? Our thoughts, we cannot. So we're basically just offering our time and letting God accept us, which he does when we come to him just as we are. Another important thing is to set a timer. Today, you don't have to set a timer because we're going to practice this together. And Barish is the timekeeper. So we're all good. Barish will ring that little bell that he rang a little while ago, and that will be your timer. But if you ever do this on your own, yeah, set a timer. It is a helpful thing. Then the third step is to clear your mind of thoughts. Haha, this is the funny one. So when I say thoughts, what do I mean? Perceptions, feelings, images, memories, reflections, commentary, that inner commentary that we have going on in our mind. Am I doing this right? Am I comfortable? Do I need a glass of water? So that's why you want to have prepared yourself ahead of time so that you're not sitting down already thirsty. Make sure that you turn off the stove before you sit down too. So you already sat down, you said your sacred word and you're in it. So you want to calm down the thoughts that come to your mind. Guess what? We are thinking sentient beings. We will think. That's the thing. And so when a thought comes to mind, just watch it go by and use your sacred word to ever so gently surrender that thought back to God. And so you're trying to keep your mind clear. And as you're sitting, you'll think, I haven't paid my water bill. Okay, I surrender that thought. Peace, back to quiet. And then you'll go, oh, I need to call so and so. Nope. Surrender that thought. Peace. And you'll find that sometimes you'll be doing that throughout the entire time. And this is a practice. It's like it takes time. It is a practice. There are some people who can get into it right away. God bless them. There's some people like me who cannot. And so it takes a while. But with practice, yes, we're able to go for several seconds, sometimes minutes, with our minds truly quiet. And whenever a thought comes to mind, just say your sacred word to gently surrender it back to God. Okay? The idea here is the return to that state of silence in our minds as we're sitting with God. Then at the end of your prayer time, when your time has finished, you would have set your alarm or your clock, you would have had a chime. In our case, for today's practice, Barish will have his little bells there. The bell will ring. And at the end of that prayer time, don't immediately just get up and go back to life. Like, that does not help. Spend that time, just a minute or so, just quiet, like think of it as re-entering, like reawakening your senses, re-entering back into your normal, state of, life. And we want to keep as much as possible the peace that we gained during our time silence before God, before we go back into our routine. So, a few things to remember. This is a practice. Centering prayer is a practice. And you might feel afraid that you're not centering right, that you're not doing the practice right. And that's okay. Just, it's a good opportunity to let go of um, this idea of performance or of doing things or a right way or a wrong way. You know, um, what does it feel like? It doesn't really feel like anything. Centering prayer doesn't feel like anything. You're not going to get a flash of lights. You're not going to get a huge revelation. You're trying to not think. And so you can think of it being an opportunity to let God work in you and to quiet your mind and to give your mind and your soul a bit of rest and to let God work behind the scenes, to trust that you will receive the rest for your mind and for your soul that you need at this time, and that it will come from God. And that during that time that you're sitting there, God is with you, right? And so you can relax your expectations, just come with what you have, and God will do the rest. Another one, another thing to remember is that you may experience some restlessness. You're going to feel a bit uncomfortable. Um, yeah, and especially for those of us who are not used to this, you might even feel like a bit of anxiety. Just let it go. Return to your sacred word. Use your sacred word to help you calm down. Um, and this is good for us. It's particularly difficult for those of us who are constantly on the go. It's one of those medicines that is like, wow, is this ever so difficult? But the more difficult it is, the more we need it, right? And so, you know, just beware that you will experience that restlessness. So we're going to take some time now and we're going to practice this together, okay? For a little bit. I think that the first time that I ever went to a centering prayer session, it lasted for 20 minutes and I thought I was going to die. Honestly, I was like, what? What am I going to do for the whole 20 minutes? I'm going to think nothing for, like, it was just overwhelming. So let's not do that. Let's just try it the first time. We're going to try it for 2 minutes. I will guide you a little bit, but not much. I will be quiet for most of the time. Just like we did for the journaling, I will recommend that you turn off your video. Um, did I say turn off video and camera? I meant to say turn off video and mute yourself. Um, and so follow the steps. The steps will remain on the screen. The reason why we don't send you to your own private chat room is so that you have access to the steps there on the screen. If you need to look at them, that's okay. Um, but you're gonna take a moment now to choose a sacred word. Remember, it can be any word, and at this point today, your first practice, it doesn't really matter what word as long as you stick to the word. So it could be anything that comes to mind right now. It could be Jesus, grace, love, peace, God, save me, mercy, just anything that comes to mind. So pick that word and keep it in your mind. And then you're going to spend some time preparing. Make sure that your posture is comfortable. I'm going to turn off my video now that I remember. Let me turn off my video here. There we go. Perfect. So, pick a posture that is comfortable for you. And take a moment to think back again about what we journaled a little while ago, about who God is for you. And that image of God that aligns with what He has shown you in Scripture. So take a moment to remember who God is for you. And at this time, we are with God. Wherever we are, if you're by yourself, you're with God. If you're with your spouse, you're with God. Because God is with all of us all the time, right? So remember that God is with you, and make yourself comfortable. Remember your word, your sacred word. And whenever a thought comes to mind, just use your sacred word to give it back to God and to surrender that thought to God. We're going to set the timer for 2 minutes, and in 2 minutes, Barish will ring a bell, and then we will quietly return. We will take our time to return. We will not turn off our camera. I won't turn off my camera immediately or my video. I will give us some time to return quietly back to our session here. Okay, so we'll set the timer for 2 minutes. Okay, so at this time, we want to give you a moment to return. Now, that's what it feels like to do this for 2 minutes. For some of you, it may have been very long, and for some of you, it may have not been, long enough. And so we're going to try that again, but the next time, this second time, we're going to do it for a little bit longer. We're going to try it again for 5 minutes and see how we do. And so just like last time, we're going to do the same steps. You know what? Before we try it, actually, I want to ask if anybody has any questions before we try a second time. Does anyone have any questions about how it was for you during the first, 2 minutes? Um, any questions about the mechanics of it or about the steps?
Do we have to be sitting or could we walk? I mean, with our eyes open, probably.
Right. Yes, you want to be sitting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a similar practice to this in mindful walking, which you can sort of do sort of a mix of that. That's sort of, I'd say, first master this, and then you can sort of combine this kind of thing with mindful walking, which is sort of where you're really slowing down your walking and really observing the environment. And you can probably mix that with prayer. That's probably
Yeah.
advanced users.
I have at the end of the session here, I have one of the books that I'll recommend to you that's on this slide actually talks about centering prayer walking, or not centering prayer walking, but about, something along the lines of a walking meditation where you're praying as you walk. And so that would probably be useful.
The practical part of my question is that I have a bad back, so sitting is not comfortable for me.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
unless I'm moving, I don't feel very comfortable.
Yeah.
So it'd be very distracting for me to sit, for a long period. Even for like I have a constant back pain, so it's more comfortable for me to be standing and moving around.
Understood. Is Jen Slovenjik in this call?
Yes.
Yes. Do you have any recommendations? Jen Slovenjik, for those of you who don't know, I mean, she is among us. She's who we look to many times when we have questions. She has gone through, several, classes on centering prayer and has been practicing for many years. So Jen, what are your recommendations?
I haven't really, I'm trying to think if this has ever come up before about being in that much discomfort that you can't sit. What I would recommend is see if you can sit and be with the discomfort. If it's that agonized, like let's say it's just agony for you, maybe lay down. But I can look into it, because I'm not sure, because I know the practice is about being still, right? But then if you have a physical impairment, if it's possible for you to be with it, and if you get distracted with the physical sensation, just to come back to with your sacred word, to just return ever so gently. But if it's really hijacking you, yeah, I'll look into it and see what I'm sure that's a question that has come up before, but at this moment I can't think of anything other than to maybe find the best possible comfortable posture for your specific situation. And if it's really that uncomfortable, you really just cannot focus at all, like you're wanting to cry kind of thing of pain, perhaps then I'll look into it. I don't know if I've never heard of like centering prayer in motion before. Welcoming prayer, maybe when we get to that, we can I think that would be something we could address in the welcoming prayer.
That's next week.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Jen. If you come across anything, let us know on the chat next time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right. Any other questions before we try it again for 5 minutes?
The only thing, the thing that it helps me is that my mind is super distracted, and so the sacred word really helps me sort of put sort of bring myself back to that contemplative reflection on God. And it's okay if, some prayers emerge from your thoughts to God. That's okay. But the purpose is sort of resting in God. That's what I understand.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Yeah.
even as they come, you have another time when you bring your prayers to God. So if the prayer comes, acknowledge it. Oh, there's a prayer I will do later. sacred word and back to quiet and back to centering. Okay, so let's try that again, this time for 5 minutes. And Barish will ring a bell when we're ready. I'm going to turn off my video and we'll be back in 5 minutes. All right, so we have that was the end of our second try. Um, hopefully that was a good experience for you. We're gonna spend a little bit of time, 3 minutes now, and again we'll go back to doing a short reflection. So I'll ask you to reflect of how that experience was for you, what you felt comfortable with, what was comfortable, what was uncomfortable, what came up for you, if anything did, as you were praying. Just general thoughts about how that was. And so if you can spend a few, just a couple minutes, it is 8:57. So I'll give you exactly 3 minutes to write in your journal. And once you finish writing in your journal, we're going to do a little bit of sharing in smaller groups. So take a few minutes to write down, and I'll leave the reflection question there. Okay. So I just realized that I wasn't looking at the chat. And one question that came up there was about white noise in the background during centering prayer. So yes, I mean, there's nothing you can do sometimes about the noises in the background. I mean, the best that you can do is you know again, shut the door, close the door, try to be where there's no noise. But um, uh, recently I've been using not headset, sorry, earplugs, and that helps me. Um, and if you have a fan, that's also helpful. In my room is super loud, so when I'm in my room, sometimes I need to have earplugs and the fan on, so that's white noise enough to like help me, but not enough to distract me. If that answers your question. Um, okay, so at this time it is 9 o'clock. I imagine that there may be some of you that need to leave the call, and that is fine. Thank you so much for joining. We've reached almost the end of our time. The only thing that we have left is a bit of a here we go. It's a bit of sharing. And so if you have time to stay for the sharing, that would be great. We can do that in breakout rooms. If not, and you have to leave, here I have put on the screen some sources for that relate to what we just did this week. The first one is, you see there is Thomas Keating, Open Mind, Open Heart. It's not the easiest things to read, but it is like the seminal tract, so to speak, on centering prayer. The second one is actually an audiobook, and this is what I was recommending earlier. Was actually the audiobook is fantastic. It's again Catherine Hermes, a Contemplative Prayer 101. I got a lot out of that, and it's available on Audible. And then the last one is Centering Prayer for Everyone by Linsa Boyer. That little pamphlet was incredibly helpful, very down to earth, is like written for the newbie who, does not know what she's doing, meaning me. Really helpful book. And it has some other practices as well besides just centering prayer. It speaks a little bit about Lectio Divina. It comments and has one chapter on walking meditations, which are really helpful. And it also has some ideas for practicing at home if you're alone, or even for practicing in groups, and for what those practices could look like in an online environment or in a digital environment. So it's a very helpful little booklet there. So I will put those on the chat, or Barish will put those on the chat. And so for those of you who can't stay, maybe Barish can break us up into rooms for us to share with each other how the experience was, for us, what we found easy, what was difficult, and we can get a couple minutes to share. And it's incredible how much we learn from one another, even the knowing that somebody else, oh yeah, I had a hard time with that too. Yeah, there's something good about that. Or yeah, that was easy for you. Oh, that's great. That gives me hope that one day maybe it may be easy for me. Or it's just really great to share. So if I can leave it up to Barish to do the breakout rooms for us, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah,